Manato has accompanied us in our adventures for a while, but it's only now in 2.3 that he joins the roster as a playable Fire Raptor agent. He's an A rank given out for free in this version, and well, that comes with positives and negatives. To get the bad out of the way first, he feels like an A rank, with clunky inputs and awkward skill interactions, plus a fair amount of bugs that I've uncovered that make getting consistent results with him challenging. Yet regardless of how his abilities flow mechanically, Manato has a unique identity that makes him engaging to play. Ishiwan, or First Rupture Unit, was little more than an attacker who ignored defense and scaled with HP. Mechanics like health rebalancing with her ultimate sounded cool but had no real purpose. Manato, however, is thoroughly a Rupture agent who highlights the identity of the class. He still ignores defense and he still scales off HP, but more than that, he uses his own HP as a resource to power attacks. Better yet, when it comes to his performance, there's no question that he is pretty darn strong, being one of the best non-limited damage units to date. It's taken some time, but Piper's finally got some real competition. So let's go through Manato's kit to understand how he works. The key to Manato is balancing out resources, not just adrenaline and decibels, but his HP. This is because his enhanced basic attack and his assist follow-ups will consume some of his health with every use. His enhanced basic attack consumes 3.5% of his HP per attack, while his assist follow-up consumes only 2%, but attacks more frequently, so in practice the HP spend isn't all that different. This HP consumption can't kill Manato though, as it will only happen while he's above 30% HP. This is pretty important, because we want attacks to consume HP. To understand why, we need to go through his character identity mechanic. Under his portrait, a gauge will track the blazing hard points in stock, going up to 100. He has many different ways of building it, and once they hit 75 out of 100, his sword will glow and he'll enter the Molten Edge state, after which, the gauge will decay at a rate of 3.3 blazing hard per second. During this state, he gets a flat 10% crit rate and 20% fire damage bonus to all attacks. It's only during this state that Manato unlocks his enhanced basic attack, the one that consumes his health. You may also notice that even if his adrenaline is maxed out, Manato does not have an EX special. It's only after building up to the Molten Edge state that he gains access to it. But perhaps the most important part is that both his enhanced basic attacks and assist follow-ups get a whopping 50% crit damage buff and 100% extra adrenaline generation when they consume HP. More important than the crit damage is the adrenaline, because Manato does not regenerate adrenaline passively. His adrenaline generation rate is 0. You can be in combat for hours, and unless he is the active character hitting enemies with his attacks, he cannot and will not generate any adrenaline. Resource management on Manato can be very difficult because of this, so maximizing adrenaline gain is key to his gameplay. All the more reason to spend HP on attacks, but that in itself is kind of a resource management game too. With how much HP is constantly being drained, Manato needs a way to recover it, and here's where his additional ability comes in handy. It needs a stun or support agent in the team to activate, and gives Manato Remnant Flame stacked when using an ultimate or chain, which you can see as a little buff icon. Ultimate gives 8 stacks and chain attacks give 4, with a cap of 20 stacks. Whenever Manato uses his enhanced basic or assist follow-up, he'll consume one of these stacks to heal 2% of his HP. It's a net neutral with assist follow-ups and a slight loss with enhanced basics, but either way you're guaranteed to get the crit and adrenaline bonuses for every hit. At best, all this does is make sure Manato isn't losing HP, or losing it slowly. He needs real healing capability to sustain his damage, and thankfully he has other ways of recovering HP. Let's go through his skills in full and cover them as they come. We've talked about Manato's enhanced basic attacks, but not his regular basics. He has 3 variants in total. A normal string, which does physical damage, and therefore does not deal sheer damage. A time string, which does half physical and half fire damage. You get it by pressing special at the right time as an attack happens. Pretty cool, but functionally useless. And that's because the only one that matters is his enhanced basic attack, which is just standard button presses while in the Molten Edge state. It's the only basic you ever want to use, as it is the one that consumes HP and gets the bonuses from his score. Next up is Manato's assists, which are key to his game plan. For once, the defensive assist, and not just the assist follow-up, matters, as landing a defensive assist will restore 75 blazing heart, instantly placing him in the Molten Edge state. This is also the first defensive assist to actually deal damage. It's not much, so more of a neat feature than something to work around, but it does trigger with every block, so in a fight like Defiler where one character parries multiple hits, it deals damage multiple times. And after a defensive assist comes an assist follow-up. You will show the tackle and then go into a series of slams. At least 1, but up to 8, which you get by pressing the basic attack button. When he's done all slams or you stop pressing the button, he'll go into a finisher swing. This skill makes up a large portion of Manato's damage and resource management capability. It has better scaling than his basics, has a net neutral HP spend when using up Remnant Flame, and generates a lot of adrenaline, all the while giving full invincibility during its cast. Unfortunately, it does have its fair share of issues, which we'll cover later. Quick Assist isn't anything to write home about. I guess it does fire damage. The same is true for dodge counters, it does what it needs to do. Dash attacks only ever do physical damage, so never worth using. Things get interesting with specials though. As mentioned before, Manato does not have an EX special until he enters Molten Edge. Relying only on defensive assists to build up the gauge would be far too restrictive, especially with the whole zero passive adrenaline generation business. This is where special comes in. When tapped, Manato will do an upward slash. When held, he will consume up to 10% of his HP to gain Blazing Heart, allowing him to max out the gauge with one cast. I would have said that it's 10 Blazing Heart per point of HP consumed, but this isn't true, as special will not use up anything under 30% HP and still build Blazing Heart. Both the instant release special and the held version also function as pseudo counters. Not quite like Ishiwatari, where it will negate all damage and automatically go into the attack once hit. Instead, Manato takes 40% less damage during special, and if he's hit during the slash or charge, a flash will appear on hit or release respectively, indicating a successful counter. Doing so will regenerate 10% HP with a 20-second cooldown. This restoration is still quite low, so that's where EX special comes in. It has a pretty insane damage multiplier of 1500%, and that's on a rupture agent. It is very costly though, at 80 adrenaline. When using it, Manato will restore 33% of his max HP. If Remnant Flame is what keeps his health stable, it's EX special that truly recovers it. And talking about Remnant Flame, we should go over Chain Attack and Ultimate, the skills that provide it. Although most of Manato's on-field damage comes from his enhanced basic and assist follow-ups, the bulk of his total damage is from Chain Attacks and Ultimates. This is even more important when running him with Fufu, whose Tiger's Roar buffs them even further. I'd like to say there isn't anything all that important to keep in mind in regards to these attacks, but unfortunately their unpolished implementation is a large part of what makes Manato feel so clunky, but we'll also cover that later. They're little more than a large burst of damage, and always worth using. Given that Remnant Flame stacks are important for healing, almost every combo is going to come down to 2 chains being used back to back into an ultimate. You may notice though that in my gameplay I don't use ultimate right after chains. Actually, you notice I get to do assist follow-ups mid-stun. What gives? For that, we need to go over Mindscapes, as they are what makes Manato as strong as he is. M1 provides up to a 20% increase in fire damage of basic attacks and assist follow-ups, scaling with how much HP is consumed. The way this works is quite interesting. With 1% HP giving a 0.4% damage increase, M1 needs 50% of Manato's HP to be consumed in order to max out the buff. It'd be a bit insane to have Manato need to be at above 30% HP but below 50% HP at all times. So instead, this is a source of permanent buff. Whenever HP is consumed, the buff stacks and stays until the stage is restarted. Manato can be healed all the way up to 100% HP and still get full benefit from the buff. So at round start, it's often worth it to do a few extra casts of special to build up the buff early and have it applied to attacks from the get-go. No need to use up 50% HP though. In fact, it's better not to, as Manato will already be using HP with his attacks anyways. So if you're at a point where there isn't any more HP to restore and Sun still hasn't arrived, you can probably cut away some of that early HP consumption and build it up naturally via attacks instead. M2 is when Manato actually becomes a viable on-field damage dealer. As mentioned before, it's his assist follow-ups that have the better scaling, but those rely on getting defensive assists. With zero passive adrenaline generation, while it's alright to play Manato as a swap-in burst unit with a greedy on-fielder like Jingyi, he's at his element when staying on-field and continuously attacking to build resources. And that's what M2 does. 8% fire res ignore while on the Molten Edge, and it allows him to use assist follow-ups after being hit during a special. So you're not only getting 10% healing to set you up for attacks, you also go straight into his most effective on-field burst. M4 is an increase to damage via the higher max HP, which Sheer Force scales with, and it prevents Manato from dying if it takes fatal damage during a special counter, with a 10-second cooldown. You don't really want to be in this position anyways, as HP will ideally always be over 30%, but some bosses can hit quite hard, so it's nice to not spontaneously die when parrying correctly. But do keep in mind it does have a cooldown, so Manato isn't always invincible. Lastly is M6. If M2 is what lets Manato burst while on field in the out of stun period, M6 is what lets him do it in stun, as if special hits a stunned enemy, he will transition into assist follow-ups without needing a counter. Better yet, he gets a 3% fire damage increase for every hit, stacking up to 5 times, for a total of 15%, lasting 8 seconds. This is why you see Ultimate being used after assist follow-ups and stun, so that the buff is fully stacked and refreshed to maximize damage dealt. There's 2 more bonuses too, which is hitting stunned enemies with special will immediately restore 75 Blazing Heart and gain 4 Remnant Flame, with a 20-second cooldown on the Remnant Flame. The Blazing Heart in particular is massive, as without it, Manato really suffers. When Manato has enough energy to EX special in the Molten Edge state, he can't use his special, which means he has no way of generating Blazing Heart without getting a defensive assist. As the gauge decays automatically, you might find yourself in a position where the gauge is about to run out and the boss is either passive or you're lacking in assist points. M2 may allow for assist follow-ups after being hit, but it is not a defensive assist, so no Blazing Heart restoration here. That leaves you with no choice but to burn EX at a suboptimal time just to be able to use his special if you aren't guaranteed to get a defensive assist. Or if you are near or in stun, have to spend time charging up the gauge instead of doing damage or setting up burst. So being in a situation where you don't have to worry about building Blazing Heart and stun and having it refresh when you come out is a big plus. Although even with all this, there will still be moments where you're lacking in Blazing Heart and you end up having your first chain not benefit from it. It plays into how awkward and unwieldy Manato can be to play at times, so why don't we talk about it, as these are things you want to be aware of when playing him. To start with, Special is incredibly unresponsive. Unlike Ishiwan, whose EX special counters happens pretty much immediately after pressing the button, Manato's special cannot interrupt his animations. It has the lowest priority order. So if you're doing basic attacks and need to counter an enemy, you can't, because you're stuck in basic attack animations. This means that you often need to dodge first, interrupt an animation, and then go into special. But that delay is so large that it can lead to attacks not getting countered at times. And as part of the animation for special, Manato steps back, and as this changes Manato's position, enemy attacks can miss. Normally this would be good, but since you need to get hit for the M2 assist follow-up to happen, it can mess things up even when you correctly time the attack. Assist follow-up has its fair share of problems too. First, every hit of its final swing is considered a finisher. This is actually not a bad thing, as it means it can kill and trigger anomalies even on the first hit. But I do mean it when I say it's every hit. So it's a pain to use with manual chain, as you need to both hold down basic or special before the very first hit connects, and not let go until the last hit has gone through. That's very minor though, and something you can control easily, just takes a bit of getting used to. The problem is that every hit other than the swing is not a finisher. If you're tight on time in Shiyu, let go early else enemies won't die. This is particularly bad when running with aftershock characters that listen to finishes as cues, as they also won't attack until the swing lands. Lucia will aftershock enemies to refresh her buffs, but if you begin casting Manato's assist follow-up, the shoulder tackle and slams do not trigger it, so you will frequently find yourself in situations where Dreamer's nursery rhyme just falls off because of how long the attack takes. It's also a pain to work with, as ideally you want to have Lucia come out of dream state at specific times, working on a cyclic timer so you can integrate refreshes seamlessly into rotations. Assist follow-ups though offset that massively. Rather than using aftershocks every 8 seconds with maybe 1 second of leeway, it's happening every 10, 12, heck, 15 seconds instead. With how long Manato's ultimate takes and how weak the assist follow-up is, you may be tempted at skipping the finisher and going right into ultimate after the 8th slam if you think there isn't enough time left in stun. But if Lucia's buffs won't refresh with a chain attack before it, doing so means it'll run out halfway during the ultimate cast, so you often need to reserve some time in stun to do the slow finisher, at least the very first hit of it. Problem is, because the swing takes so long, it means that then you get Dreamer's nursery rhyme refreshed, but then you may not actually get the ultimate to land in stun, and that's even worse. It doesn't end there, because as an assist follow-up, you cannot swap out of Manato during its cast unless it's through a defensive assist. So if you're setting up for stun and need to quickly swap out to refresh buffs, or you have resources on other characters and want to spend it, you can't. From start to end, you're locked to Manato and Manato only. It's not all doom and gloom, as thankfully you can dash cancel out of the assist follow-up extensions, and as soon as Manato is in dash animation, characters can be swapped to. So depending on the situation, it may even be better to just skip some of the slams and dash cancel out. The M6 buff fully resets the duration, so if you've done some other assist follow-up 8 seconds prior, you retain all the stacks. But if you take too long and the swing begins, that's a full animation lock. No dash cancelling out of that one. And it's still not over. A big problem Manato has is that he does not retarget enemies at all during the assist follow-up. Against mobile enemies like Miasma Priest, this frequently leads to Manato whiffing his attacks and finisher entirely. Defiler is another one where this constantly happens, which really tanks Manato's damage and resource generation in fights that already demand tight rotations. It also happens on the new boss very often, but let's keep it spoiler-free for now. To be honest, the shoulder tackle can miss too, putting Manato miles away from his target and completely invalidating the attack. In fact, his chain does that too, putting Manato so far that other characters are left too far to be able to hit enemies to trigger a second chain. Worse yet, it puts him so far that Manato himself can't hit enemies after. I've been told that this is part of the design intention. Special isn't meant to always land, and his basic attack 2 should instead, which you can shortcut to after chain or ultimates. Except that doesn't always work either. As I'm practically a free QA test resource at this point, let me break down what's bugged about the chain and what you need to watch out for. When a chain attack is triggered, Manato will come out from behind and dash through the enemy, ending on an explosion. What should happen is that the explosion is centered around the enemy. The problem is that the explosion isn't determined by the enemy location, but by Manato's starting position at chain attack cast. If you're close to a wall and a chain attack is used, because the wall serves as an obstruction, Manato does not appear as far back as he should, so he dashes much further away from enemies than he otherwise would. This puts him so far from enemies that his special, and yes, even his basic 2, will not land. It doesn't have to be beside the wall exactly either, as dashing away from the wall causes a similar problem. Anything that alters Manato's starting position. It may seem oddly specific, like needing to be close to a wall, but with how much bosses in Shi 1 Deadly Assault move, it isn't uncommon to have most of a fight happen near a wall, where the bug happens. It gets worse though, because on angled or curved walls, this can cause a chain attack to miss entirely, as the game can't figure out where to place the explosion. This isn't unique to VR gimmicks though. I'll show some footage of the new boss here, so if you don't want spoilers, close your eyes for a bit. The new boss's stage is angled, so this happens surprisingly frequently. I've had multiple runs die because Manato's chain just misses completely. You don't need to be directly up against the wall either, just chain attacking into a wall is enough to cause a bug, so it's a real pain. Okay, you can open your eyes now, back to being spoiler free. This all may come across as me just being frustrated, and it is, but it is something that's important to point out. Even just recently, I've been calling out issues with Seed's steel charge economy, or Orphe's ridiculously long animation logs. For Orphe at least, that got fixed, so who knows, maybe Manato will get a touch up. The chain attack positioning and whiffing issues at least are certainly bugs, so there's hope. Many other decisions though, like special having low priority, are clearly intentional, seeing as we have characters that don't suffer from this. With a new S-rank Fire Raptor agent coming out just next patch, Manato's unwieldiness does appear to be by design. Yet even with all of this, I genuinely enjoy playing him. I think there's a good comparison to be made with Ishiwatari and Evelyn. Ishiwatari has constant iframes, responsive counters, and a lot of leniency in its timing. Evelyn though, well, her enhanced basic has no iframes. Her EX and special counters have very tight timing with low priority, and she's riddled with long, uninterruptible animations on her basics that make it difficult to get counters off when you really need it most. And yet, the skill that she demands to be able to do these things effectively is in large part what makes her so enjoyable. So while I've had my time here having a bit of a moan on all the issues Manato has, I still find him a really fun character. Maybe not the bugs, but the gameplay. And there's something about smashing enemies hundreds of times over only to walk away from a huge explosion that really activates my neurons. And as I've mentioned before, just because Manato feels like an A rank doesn't necessarily mean that he's weak. Quite the opposite. Other creators have done calcs that place him well above S rank Soldier 11 in performance, and this really does seem to be the case with his best teams, regardless of shield buff. In fact, let's touch briefly on his teams. It's usually going to be a shell of Manato with a stunner and support. You can run double support, Pan and Lucia, Pan and Astra, or Lucia and Astra can all work, although I wouldn't recommend it. Manato wants you to use chain attacks and ultimates frequently to maintain Remnant flame stacks, as otherwise he'll struggle having enough HP to sustain his attacks. It's already hard enough even with a stunner, so getting quicker and faster stuns is the better option even for out-of-stun damage. There also isn't much variety in supports for Manato. Pan is the best A-rank option and nobody else comes close. For Rupture Agents, M6 Pan is the equivalent of M0 Astra in terms of buff value. Since his ultimate provides healing, it makes it even easier to manage Manato's HP. Although Astra, especially with Mindscapes or with Game Ball, can pull out ahead. Lucia is by far and away the best, and it's no contest. The buffs she provides to Rupture Agents are ridiculous. I've got a guide that covers how she works, so I'd recommend checking it out. It's also got a 45,000 player of Manato on Miasma Priest with her and Fufu there, so worth a watch. And Fufu is also the best stunner to use of Manato. A Despo Refund makes it easy for him to have ultimates ready for every stun, and with most of his damage coming from chains and ultimates, her Tiger's Roll buff makes it even better. Being an inactive Aftershock stunner helps, as it affords him the field time to build up adrenaline. On the same vein, Trigger works well there, even without her additional ability being fulfilled, and Pokra is a viable A-rank option if at M6. As for Kaleda, she's actually pretty good for Manato. Since her additional ability is active and Manato does like his chains, they synergize surprisingly well. Kaleda doesn't need all that much field time, and using dodge counters and defensive assists back and forth between the two feels, and does, surprisingly well. Even Shingi is a good unit. While Manato does want to be on field for resources, staying on Shingi and defensive assisting back to him isn't all that bad. Although a low commitment stunner like Fufu does make it easier to manage resources, it's still fine to run an on-field stunner instead, especially as it effectively guarantees you never run out of Blazing Heart. Of course, there's the elephant in the room, Lighter. Lighter would normally not make the list, as his buffs are dependent on his additional ability that need either Attacker or Sons of Caladan characters. Manato being Ruptured doesn't fit the criteria. I suppose you could run him with Lucy or Pokra? Heck, with how you barely quickswap out of Manato's attacks, Caesar is surprisingly not half bad. But Lucia on Pan, Astra, and especially Lucia wouldn't even be a contest. Orphe though is a fire attacker who not only buffs the team but contributes significant damage herself. So what about a Manato Lighter Orphe comp? Surprisingly, it does alright, even on Miasma Priest with a Rupture shield buff. It was getting similar scores to a Fufu Pan comp on Miasma Priest, with Pan using Caesar's signature. It was also a fair bit harder to route, as maintaining zeroed in for bursts and finding places to slot in Orphe's ultimate was difficult, and so I felt it was less consistent. But to be honest, with attack to shear conversion being only 30%, it isn't all that big, and I didn't really test all that much, using default gearing on characters. Orphe had 13 substats? Not 30, 13. If such a terribly geared Orphe is keeping up with the Fufu and M6 pan team with Caesar's signature, then imagine how well it'd do when properly geared. So Orphe and Lighter alone can do very well, are likely to do even better against fire-weak enemies. The new boss does have high defense, but between Orphe's additional ability and her signature, she's well placed to compete. I wouldn't roll Orphe for Manato if you have Lighter. You'd need her to be geared for the comp to truly shine, and even then you'd be far better off getting Lucia and literally anything else. And if you don't want Lucia, then Pan, if at M6 at least, more than holds his own weight. But hey, if you want to roll with 2 dudes in a team, or you want a comp that can actually make use of Inferno Metal, then you could certainly do worse. Talking about Inferno Metal, let's go over Manato's stats and drive discs. Stats-wise, it's simple. Crit damage on D4, fire damage percent or HP percent on D5, and HP percent on D6. As is the case for Rupture Agents, crit damage, crit rate, and HP percent for substats. Manato does get a lot of fire damage bonuses from his kit, 20% from core, 20% from M1, 15% from M6, 24% from his signature, which we'll cover in a bit. Even then, it's still his best bet to use fire damage percent, but not by too much, so substat differences will often win out. If endgame buffs bump raw damage percent and not sheer damage percent, as that's a different modifier, then HP percent can be better regardless of substats. I've already gone on about Evelyn, but the parallels just write themselves. And that's because Manato really doesn't have any drive disc set that's perfect for him. Attack only converts to sheer damage at a 30% rate, so Woodpecker and Hormone Punk just aren't that good. Most of Manato's damage is coming from assist follow-ups, chain attacks, and ultimates, so even with his enhanced basic, Dawn's Bloom isn't doing all that much either. Inferno Metal would be ideal, but even with Fufu there, it just isn't enough uptime, and it isn't feasible to align it for stun bursts. It does work with Lighter Orphe, I guess, but it's just not usable against the new boss, as it has a much higher anomaly build-up threshold, so you get 4, maybe 5 burns the whole fight despite it being fire weak, which leaves you with the Yunqui Tails. That isn't great either, as Manato's EX special costs a whopping 80 adrenaline, and remember, he has no passive adrenaline generation, so getting resources on him takes a lot more work. You're guaranteed to not have it up at all in the out of stun period, and not just a 3-stack buff, but even single stacks, which isn't ideal. But it does allow him to have the full buff up for stun, as it builds on chain attacks and ultimates as well as EXs. So a combination of EX special into double chain, or chain into EX into chain, works to have it up for most of the burst. Given that the only option that remotely come close to Yunqui Tails is Inferno Metal, and that's if it were well managed, Manato doesn't have much of a choice here. Not because Yunqui Tails is any good, but because everything else is just much worse. Wengens are something that you can lean on other creators for detailed calcs on, but for Manato specifically, it influences how he's played. Surprisingly, his signature Wengen, Grillo Wisp, is also his best in slot. Even better than Ishiwan's signature, despite its high base attack. At P1, it should still be better than Radio Wave Journey or Puzzle Sphere at P5, so that's the priority. When you look at the bonuses it provides, is it any wonder? It's an HP main stat weapon with a 24% unconditional fire damage bonus and 24% crit rate for 5 seconds when Manato loses HP. Considering that his enhanced basic attacks and assist follow-ups are constantly draining HP, you have a near 100% uptime off the buff, although it can change how you route your stun combos. If you've got Ishiwan's signature, use it until you've got a few phases on Grillo Wisp. If you don't even have one drop, then Radio Wave Journey or Puzzle Sphere until you get it. The way Manato plays is broadly the same for all, which is a cue for us to touch on Manato's gameplay approach. And with most of his damage happening in stun, we want to have as many buffs up as possible for it. Maintaining Grillo Wisp's buff is nothing to concern yourself out of stun, but it does get a bit complicated when going into it. Chain attacks don't consume any HP. On top of that, the final hit of Manato's assist follow-up has its HP consumption bundled with a final slam. So even if you're opening stun with a chain attack after you're able to swap out of him, the buff will not last long enough to cover both chains. The reality is, even such a scenario is rarely the case, as you won't always have enemy attacks line up in such a way that you get the perfect setup. So the ideal combo is to use assist follow-ups before the stun begins to build up the M6 stacks and then go into an EX special as stun begins, doing a fair bit of damage while also building up the first stack of Yunqui Tails. As Manato's EX special can take a bit of time to land in full, this is the opportunity to spend resources on other characters and trigger chain, going right back to Manato. Once chain is over, hold special just long enough for some HP to be consumed, refreshing the crit rate buff and, if it lands, restoring Blazing Heart. Then swap to another character to trigger chain again. This is a good opportunity to use a support ultimate if available. After Manato's chain is over, go into a special, into assist follow-ups, and unload as many attacks as possible. Ideally all of them, but at least 5 if time and stun is short to refresh the M6 buff. Depending on who you're running with, do a quick check of buffs. You will need to land a swing at the end to refresh Rima's nursery rhyme, but if stun is about to run out and you have time and the buff, it's fine to skip it and go straight into an ultimate. If time and stun allows, let all hits of the finisher connect for a bit of extra damage and then end on an ultimate. If you don't have M6, no worries about maintaining buff stacks pre-stun, and if in-stun, do enhanced basic attacks instead of assist follow-ups. It won't always work perfectly. Sometimes you might need to use EX special out of stun for Day's build. You may not always get to use assist follow-ups right before the stun state, missing out on the M6 buff. Or you won't have the opportunity to spend EX just so stun begins, with stunner ultimates or boss mechanics leading to early chains, in which case, just using it between chains is good enough. Outside of that, Manato's gameplay is quite straightforward, although its execution can be complex, in large part due to how resource management works. In general, you start the fight having pre-built Blazing Heart with special, and maybe doing a few extra for M1. After that, just try to land as many assist follow-ups as possible, be it after special with M2 or from defensive assists. If the enemy isn't attacking, then do enhanced basic attacks to continue building adrenaline, as otherwise, you find yourself getting to stun without having enough to EX special. If we're being particular about it, making sure you get at least one special counter every 20 seconds for the heal, and doing most of your assist follow-ups after defensive assists would be ideal. The refill on Blazing Heart goes a long way. And that's because you don't want to find yourself in a position where you get to stun just as Blazing Heart's running out, else you'll lose out on its burst for the first chain. Then it's just making sure you're aligning stuns with resources and doing any setups beforehand, like assist follow-ups from 6 stacks or having buffs up from other units. Better than talking about gameplay, why not look at some clears with Manato, Fufu, and Lucia on Defiler and the new boss? We'll start with Defiler, so the spoilers come after. In case you're curious about the score but aren't quite ready to see the boss, I got around 41,500 on Defiler and 53,000 on the new boss. Miasma Priest was 45,000, and that's in the Lucia guide video, all using the same buffs and builds. So with no further ado, let's get to it. Manato has been a bit of an adventure for me. It's no secret that I'm a big fan of male characters, and a big fan of fighting games, so having a 2010s DeviantArt so bad guy OC become playable was genuinely quite exciting, even as an A rank. But between the unresponsive commands, awkward skill use, and the countless bugs, it got a little frustrating. I'd be on track for much higher scores, but then get grieved on the final stun because I couldn't reach with a special, or worse yet, my chain would miss entirely. Even though my Asthma Priest run from the Lucia guide video had this happen in the clear, it was so frequent I couldn't be bothered to restart for a better run. When things work though, this character is actually really fun. He's simple to pick up but very hard to master, needing you to predict and respond to enemy attacks in advance, having countless resources to manage, and rewarding specific adjustments in routing. Skill expression not in fancy combos, but in the setups and little optimizations that add up over the course of a run. And if you are interested in learning what these little optimizations are for the new boss, want to stay in the loop regarding niche character tech, or want to be notified for when new guides drop, why not like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell? I've got more videos coming. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.